Every year, thousands of Indians board a one-way flight to America, chasing the same promise of a better salary, better infrastructure, and a better life. And on paper, they get exactly that. Wider roads, cleaner air, paychecks with more zeros. And yet, within weeks, sometimes within days, something strange starts happening. Everyone is taught that developed means better. More money, better systems, better everything. But after a while, a different picture starts to emerge. It's the loss of a social fabric that took generations to build, and that no salary can simply buy back. So stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to look at India a little differently. Let's get into it. In India, especially in the bigger cities, life runs late. Shops stay open well into the night. Late-night dining in America actually shrank after the pandemic. Labor shortages and rising operating costs made it harder for restaurants to justify staying open past a certain hour. And a lot of places that used to run late simply never came back that way. Now compare that to India, where the night barely slows down. Quick commerce apps can drop a full bag of groceries at your door in minutes, at almost any hour. Food delivery is just as fast and reliable deep into the night. Tea stalls are still pouring tea. In much of the U.S., especially outside major metro downtowns, things shut down early. Stores close by 9 or 10. Restaurants stop serving. Streets that were busy at 6 p.m. are eerily quiet by 10. It's a small shift, but it changes the rhythm of daily life in a way that's hard to explain. In India, feeling unwell rarely means booking an appointment weeks in advance. Clinics take walk-ins. Many people can be examined, diagnosed, and treated within the same hour they decide something is wrong. In America, the average wait time just to see a primary care doctor is about a few weeks. For anything urgent that cannot wait that long, the alternative is the emergency room. And the emergency room comes with a price tag that can shock even people who have lived in the U.S. for years. A visit for a relatively minor issue without insurance can run $1,000 to $2,500. A more serious case can climb past $10,000. For Indians abroad, this becomes real the first time a minor infection or a bad fever turns into a multi-step process of scheduling, insurance calls, and anxious waiting. A process that, back home, would have ended in under an hour with a short visit to the neighborhood clinic. This is not about the quality of American medicine. It is a story about access, about how long someone has to wait and how much they have to pay simply to get through the front door of the system. India has also spent the last several years building a public health insurance net of its own, aimed at covering hospitalization costs for several hundred million low-income citizens who would otherwise be one bad diagnosis away from financial ruin. It is a rapidly growing system, expanding in the exact years that America's own healthcare costs have kept climbing. 10 minutes is roughly what it takes a shopper in Indian cities to get groceries delivered to their door, thanks to a network of small, hyper-local warehouses known as dark stores. It is now a multi-billion-dollar sector, moving tens of thousands of crores of goods every year, employing thousands of delivery riders, and expanding into medicine, electronics, and even fashion. But dark stores did not appear out of nowhere. They exist because India already had something underneath them. A corner shop on nearly every street. Step out of almost any Indian home, and there's a kirana store within a minute's walk, along with a few fruits and vegetable vendors. Every neighborhood has at least a couple of them, maybe several, sometimes on the same street at the same time. In America, a farmer's market or a fresh produce stall exists too, but it usually costs more and functions like an occasional treat rather than a daily habit. In India, that same fresh produce isn't a treat. It's just another day. None of this, the dark stores, the 10-minute delivery, the constant stream of riders moving through every neighborhood, works without one more quiet Indian achievement sitting underneath all of it. That's an achievement of its own, and it's coming up next on this list. A gigabyte of mobile data in the United States costs around $6, making it more expensive than in almost every other wealthy democracy on the planet, and placing America near the bottom of global rankings for data affordability. In India, that same gigabyte costs a fraction of that. The price has fallen so far that a single rupee equivalent now buys what used to take an entire day's wages. Government data shows the cost of a gigabyte falling from over 200 rupees a decade ago to roughly 8 rupees today, a collapse that helped bring hundreds of millions of new users online in less than 10 years. This is not just a convenience for scrolling social media. Cheap, abundant data is the invisible infrastructure underneath everything else on this list. The quick commerce, the quick payments, the ride booking, the video calls. None of it works without data that ordinary people can actually afford to use constantly, not sparingly. For an Indian abroad, something that felt limitless back home suddenly comes with a limit and a bill. The scale of what cheap data unlocked is hard to overstate. India's internet user base grew from roughly 25 crore people in 2014 to nearly 97 crore a decade later, an addition of over 70 crore new users in 10 years, almost entirely because the price of getting online finally dropped low enough for nearly everyone to afford it. Ask an Indian who has lived in America what surprised them most about money, and a common answer is how much friction is still built into paying for things. India's UPI system has become the largest real-time payments network on Earth, handling close to half of all real-time digital transactions globally, more than 3 times the share of Brazil's well-known Pix system. It moves money instantly between any 2 bank accounts for free, using nothing more than a phone number or a QR code. In America, a large share of daily payments still runs through card networks that take a cut on every single transaction, or older systems like paper checks, which can take days to clear. Peer-to-peer apps exist, but they often sit on top of the banking system rather than replacing its slowness and its fees. For someone used to splitting a bill for 8 people over UPI in under 10 seconds, watching an American waiter split one card machine transaction 8 different ways manually feels like stepping back in time. This is not a small convenience. India built a payment system so efficient that the street vendor selling tea accepts digital payment just as easily as a 5-star hotel. UPI now clears more than 700 million transactions on an average day, a volume no single payment network in America comes close to matching. That level of universal, fee-free, instant payment access simply does not exist at the same scale in the world's richest economy. In much of America, owning a car is not a choice. It is a requirement for participating in daily life. In India, a car is often a comfort, not a necessity. Autos, expanding metro networks, two-wheelers, easily available cabs or shared rides mean that getting around a city does not require the same enormous fixed cost. In 2014, India's metro network measured under 250 kilometers. By late 2025, it had crossed 1,000 kilometers, making India the 3rd largest metro network on Earth, and on track to overtake the United States, whose entire metro network sits at roughly 1,400 kilometers within the next 2 to 3 years. That number matters because of what it replaces. In a growing number of Indian cities, someone can genuinely live an entire life, commuting to work, visiting family, running errands, without ever owning a car. Between metro lines, auto rickshaws, and shared rides, getting around a city rarely depends on one single expensive asset sitting in a driveway. In large parts of America, particularly outside a handful of major cities, that option barely exists. Public transport can be sparse or entirely absent, and daily life is built around the assumption that everyone drives and has a car. For an Indian moving to a car-dependent American suburb, the shock is not the traffic. It is the total absence of alternatives. Back home, a broken-down car, a friend without a ride, or a rainy evening still leaves several ways to get where you're going. By late 2025, the Delhi Metro alone was set to become the largest single-city metro network on the planet, surpassing even New York's century-old system. A capital city outbuilding the network that New York took 100 years to construct in barely 2 decades is not a small achievement. It is a statement about public infrastructure of India. In much of America, the cost of childcare has become one of the largest line items in a young family's budget. Full-time infant care at a daycare center now averages well over $1,000 a month nationally, climbing past $2,000 a month in high-cost states, often more than the family's rent. In India, the equivalent cost is frequently zero. A grandparent, an aunt, or a neighbor steps in without being asked twice, treating a newborn as a shared responsibility. That said, India isn't only relying on informal family support. Dual-income Indian couples who want or need professional care have real options too. A growing private market of creches and playgroups in every major city, priced well below American equivalents. And underneath that private market sits a government-run safety net most of the world doesn't have. Nearly 1.4 million Anganwadi centers across the country, offering free childcare, nutrition, and early education, mainly for families who cannot afford the private option at all. So the actual picture has three layers. Families who want paid, professional daycare can get it cheaply in most cities. Families who cannot afford even that fall back on a free government-run center in their own neighborhood. And in the households where none of that quite fits, the oldest safety net still holds. A grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, or simply a neighbor who has known the family for years, stepping in without a second thought. Nobody in that chain is left with no option at all, which is precisely the gap that so often opens up in America once the daycare bill becomes unaffordable. This difference rarely shows up in headline economic comparisons, but it changes the shape of a young family's entire financial life. An Indian couple earning a modest salary can still have both parents working, secure in the knowledge that childcare is handled, whether that means a creche, a government center, or family. An American couple earning several times more can still find themselves calculating whether a second income is even worth it, once daycare costs are subtracted. American families now spend an average of roughly a fifth of their entire household income on childcare alone, a single expense category quietly rivaling rent or a car payment. For Indians abroad having their first child in America, this is often the single sharpest financial culture shock of all, realizing that the safety net they always assumed was normal simply does not exist on the other side of the world. Now, the average apartment in the United States now rents for over $1,700 a month, with the typical American household spending close to a third of its entire budget just on housing. In India's cities, rent takes up a real but far smaller bite of income, and for a large share of the middle class, owning a home, even a modest one, remains a realistic, achievable milestone rather than a distant dream. This gap explains a pattern many Indians abroad notice quickly. American friends and colleagues, even those earning what looks like a very comfortable salary, often talk about rent the way people elsewhere talk about a second mortgage, a source of constant financial pressure that eats a huge share of every paycheck before anything else gets paid. In coastal hubs like San Francisco or New York, a one-bedroom apartment can run $3,000 a month or more, an amount that converted would cover rent on a spacious apartment in an Indian metro for the better part of a year. Student debt in the United States has climbed toward $1.9 trillion, spread across more than 40 million borrowers. The average graduate now leaves college owing close to $40,000, a bill that can take a decade or more to pay off, quietly shaping decisions about marriage, home ownership, and starting a family for years afterward. In India, the cost of a comparable degree, including many respected engineering and medical programs, is a fraction of that figure, and a much larger share of students graduate with little or no debt at all. This is one of the least visible but most consequential culture shocks for Indians abroad. Watching a person, 10 years into their career, still paying off the same loan that funded their undergraduate degree is a stark contrast to a system back home where education, while not free, rarely leaves an entire decade of financial shadow behind it. The cost of attending an in-state public university in America has risen well over 100% in the last 20 years, far outpacing wage growth over the same stretch, meaning the debt problem is not shrinking. It is compounding, year after year, for every new graduating class. The American salary looks enormous on paper until a chunk of every single paycheck has already been promised to a debt that started before the first day of the first job. In India, even a modest middle-class household can usually afford some help. A cook, a cleaner, a tailor who can alter a shirt the same afternoon, a cobbler who can fix a shoe in minutes, all charging amounts that barely register against a monthly budget. In America, hiring a house cleaner, a nanny, or even getting a quick tailoring job done can cost a genuinely significant amount, often making these services a luxury rather than a routine part of life. A single home cleaning visit can cost more than an entire week's groceries. A nanny, on a monthly basis, can rival what many households pay in rent. In India, personal services form a dense, affordable economy that quietly supports millions of households and gives millions of workers a livelihood. In America, most people end up doing everything themselves: cooking, cleaning, repairing, driving, after a full day at work, because paying someone else to help is simply not within reach for most incomes. For Indians abroad, this shift from support is available and affordable to support exists, but costs a small fortune is one of the quieter, more exhausting adjustments of moving west. One that no salary increase fully makes up for, because the time it costs to do everything alone cannot be bought back. It also means something rarely discussed in these comparisons. India's affordable personal services economy is itself a massive source of employment. In an Indian neighborhood, a local shopkeeper will often extend credit to a regular customer with nothing more than a scribbled note in a notebook. No forms, no formal check, just years of trust built through repeated small transactions. In America, access to almost everything financial, a loan, an apartment lease, even some mobile phone plans, runs through a credit score, a number built slowly over years of borrowing and repaying, and one that can lock someone out of basic services if it has not been built up yet, regardless of how much cash they actually have. This becomes a real practical problem for newly arrived Indians in America, who often discover that having money in the bank is not the same as having a credit history. A well-paid professional with a healthy income can still struggle to rent an apartment or get approved for a car loan simply because the American system has no record of them yet. India's informal, relationship-based credit economy is not a backward workaround. It is a parallel system that lets ordinary trust do the job that a rigid, decade-long paper trail does in America. It is invisible, it is unregulated, and it works for millions of people every single day. That informal trust economy now sits alongside a formal one that barely existed a decade ago. Close to 58 crore Jan Dhan bank accounts have been opened since 2014, bringing basic banking to households that had never held a formal account before. Often the very same households the neighborhood shopkeeper had already been extending credit to for years. Go back to where this all started. A GDP per capita nearly 7 times higher in America than in India. On paper, that number should settle every argument about where life is easier. But add up everything covered so far: rent eating a third of every paycheck, childcare costing more than a mortgage, a single ER visit wiping out a month's savings, student debt outliving the degree it paid for, a car payment that never really ends, and a very different picture starts to form. None of this means America lacks opportunity or that its systems don't work. They often work very well. But the salary that looks so enormous from the outside gets quietly divided, piece by piece, among costs that a similar Indian household either does not have or has at a fraction of the price. This is the real story behind these cultural shocks. It is not that India is simply cheaper. It is that India has, often without global recognition, built family structures, digital systems, and public infrastructure that quietly outperform what trillions of dollars have built elsewhere. The number on the paycheck tells one story. The number left over at the end of the month tells another. And for a lot of Indians who have lived on both sides of that gap, it is the second number that actually matters. A lot of Indians who move to America discover that the things they miss most aren't the big, obvious things. They're the small, warm, chaotic, deeply human textures of everyday Indian life. The unannounced visitor, the neighbor's tea. It turns out the things that are hardest to leave behind are rarely the things you expect. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.